2024 was a roller coaster year for video games. Quite literally, there was a peak at the beginning of the year, a valley in the summertime, and then another peak later on in the fall. It wasn't so bad though. The dip in the summer allowed me to play some games that I had been meaning to play for quite a while now. And what we got this year was also pretty swell. So let's take a look at my favorite games of 2024. I had been looking forward to another Crab's Treasure ever since hearing about it a couple of years ago. Described by the trailers as a Shells-like, you assume the role of Krill, a hermit crab who has had his shell stolen and is on a mission to get it back. I think the game does a really good job at adding a shot of life into the genre, both mechanically and tonally. Mechanically, the game adds its own spin to things with the shells. Each shell has its own set of stats and an ability tied to it. Some will add buffs, others will do special attacks. My favorites were the party hat with its cool shotgun blast kind of attack, and the tennis ball with its rollout maneuver. The game also does a great job at traversal and making the levels fun to explore. The thing that surprised me most about Another Crab's Treasure was the writing. I was expecting a few silly puns here and there, but this game had me rolling constantly. The opening of the game, where Krill didn't understand what taxes are or what a duchy is, was hilarious. The currency being microplastics is a bit that has cracked everybody that I've told about this game. The characters in the game are all really likable and mostly ridiculous too. Krill is a relatable protagonist who is essentially just someone trying to get by while fighting off the existential dread of existence. Nema works really well as a kind of moral center for Krill. Titan is hilariously over-serious about everything. Firth is the C equivalent of an NFT bro. Pronathan and Roland are both really good slimeball antagonists. And the villain introduced in the last third of the game was really well executed with a bone-chilling performance behind them. Overall, Another Crab's Treasure has fun mechanics and a malleable tone that make for an interesting and memorable time. Anton Blast is the most fun I've had with a 2D platformer in a long time. It is a glorious and chaotic assault on the senses with addictively energetic gameplay. The general setup is a hilarious mix of Snow White and Donkey Kong Country, and I am here for it. The devil steals Dynamite Anton's alcohol collection in order to siphon Anton's redness away. The game has a bunch of cool stuff going on mechanically as well. On top of jumping, Anton has a dash, a slide, and a cool hammer bounce. I really enjoy the boost mechanic that is present in the game. If you hit a dash and then follow up with another dash at the right time, your momentum will chain together. I think it complements the level design really well. Moving through the level at high speed is invigorating, but if you get too reckless with the speed, it will come back to bite you. The levels are organized in such a way that it makes it possible to see what's coming next, but being able to react in time is another ball of wax. I think it all controls really well too. Anton never did something I didn't want him to, and shockingly, this even applied to the water segments. The levels come in two phases. The first part is the more exploratory part, where you can go at your own pace if you want, and search for collectibles to your heart's content. The second phase is the happy hour phase, which is a timed segment where everything comes crashing down around you in a blood-pumping race to the finish. The thing that's cool about the happy hour segments is that it feels more like a victory lap in a lot of ways. You spent the past several minutes familiarizing yourself with the level. Now use your knowledge to blast through all of these obstacles on your way back to the entrance. The game also sprinkles in some extra mechanics such as pinball or jetpacks to keep you on your toes. The bosses also served as a fun change of pace from the rest of the platforming. All of these gameplay elements gel together with an amazing soundtrack wrapped in a 90s cartoon package that makes the whole experience a blast. The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom was not something I had on my 2024 bingo card. After Tears of the Kingdom last year, I thought it would be a little longer before we got another full-on Zelda game. Echoes of Wisdom takes things in a really fun direction too. You get to play as Zelda with a cool and unique set of gameplay mechanics and a really fun version of Hyrule. The mechanic that this game really hangs its hat on is the copy power that Zelda has. Most of the objects and monsters in the game can be copied, which opens up the possibilities for puzzle solving in a way that makes solutions much more free-form. I think it's a really cool way to take some of the design philosophy from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom and inject it into the top-down Zelda space. I think it works pretty effectively and makes Echoes of Wisdom one of the more mechanically interesting top-down games in the series. I really enjoyed this version of Hyrule as well. There's an enjoyable tongue-in-cheek tone to the proceedings. For example, two of the high-ranking advisors to the king are named General Right and Minister Left. Also, this version of Link hails from Suthorn Village, and there were a myriad of other jokes that this game had that got a laugh out of me. We see a lot of fun iterations and spins on previously established elements of the series. One notable example is how they handled the Zoras in this game. They are split into two tribes in Echoes of Wisdom, both respectively being the older Link to the Past merfolk-looking Zora, and then the other tribe being the sleeker Breath of the Wild shark person type of design. The two tribes coexist and intermingle during their part of the story, and it was a lot of fun to mend the rivalry between the two chiefs. This game also brings back Deku Scrubs for the first time in a while. They have their own segment of the map, and you see business scrubs dotted throughout the world. They sell you smoothies that restore your life and buff you depending on what ingredients you use. It was cool to see the Deku Scrubs again, and I can say the same thing for a number of other creatures that returned in this game. The one minor gripe I have with the game is that Zelda essentially becomes the same blank slate that Link usually is while you play as her. I was hoping that getting to play as Zelda would see the game explore an arc for her to a similar degree that the past couple of games have. It's nothing experience ruining though, and I feel like Tri, our companion for the game, makes up for this with their arc. Altogether, I really like Echoes of Wisdom. I really hope the series continues to experiment with the kind of style mixing that's present in Echoes of Wisdom going forward. The interesting gameplay mechanics and the fun and unique version of Hyrule make it a standout from the rest of the series. Ever since getting into the Persona series several years back, I've been interested in giving Persona 3 a try, and thankfully the release of Persona 3 Reload provided an occasion to finally experience the game. And what do you know, I rather enjoyed it. Persona 3 carries such a pervasive sense of melancholy throughout the experience. The general setup is that the protagonist transfers into a new school and is recruited to SEAS, a club dedicated to investigating Tartarus, the supernatural location of the game, and the Dark Hour, the strange extra hour of the night that Tartarus appears during. If exploring a labyrinthine facsimile of the underworld wasn't enough to hammer home the theming of the game, the way the party activates their personas in this game is by putting a gun to their head. It is as alarming as it is metal. At a gameplay level, I'd wager that Persona 3 Reload is fairly similar to Persona 5 as far as combat is concerned. Exploit enemy weaknesses to knock them down, and go for the kill with an all-out attack. One new thing that this game offers is theurgies, which are essentially limit breaks with various different effects, such as a massive party heal or a severe damage of a particular type. Persona 3 Reload is a tad different in the way it is structured though. Rather than specifically designed dungeons like in Persona 5, we have a single huge dungeon that we take in sections. Whether or not exploring Tartarus jives with you will be a coin flip. I didn't hate it, but I was never particularly intrigued by this location either. This extends in many ways to how I felt about the main story at times. Since a lot of the mystery of the game revolved around what was going on with Tartarus, there were instances where it could feel kind of meandering. Thankfully, dungeons and main story events are only part of the battle. I think Persona 3 Reload does a great job with all of its side content. One thing that's really cool about this version of the game is that all of the social links are fully voiced. This does wonders for bringing these stories to life. I think some of the more secondary characters like Yoko, the sports team manager, or Mako, the girl at the playground, were really elevated by the performances that the actors put on. The same can be said about the rest of the main cast as well. I think everybody in the group has a really solid arc throughout the game. I think the game does a good job at introducing and balancing everyone's attention in a way that prevents them from feeling like they've fallen out of focus because it's not their turn yet, or because their turn in the spotlight was way back at the beginning. The shine is pretty evenly distributed throughout the entire runtime. Altogether, I am very glad that I finally got to experience Persona 3 in some form or fashion, and I think Reload was a great way for me to do so. Its broader story provided a neat thematic through line for the 3 modern games in the series for me, and its sense of tone and very likable cast managed to hold my interest the whole time. Senua's Saga was one of my most anticipated games coming into this year. The first game was rather important to me, so I had a built-in curiosity for the sequel. Senua's Sacrifice was also relatively self-contained, so I was wondering what they were going to do, and I think that Ninja Theory pulled it off swimmingly. I think this game does a good job at taking what worked from the first one and finding a way to elevate it. For example, I think that the combat in this game is about the same as the first one from a mechanic standpoint. However, the way it's presented with the new animations makes everything feel so much more visceral. Every successful dodge made it feel like you were a hair's breadth from being cut open. Every missed parry had the full weight of an enemy's strike driving you down to a knee. And all of Senua's attack animations are these wild swings that make it look like she was possessed by a demon. The story felt like a solid step forward from where the first game left off. Senua's Saga acts as an interesting thematic companion to Senua's Sacrifice. Sacrifice was focused pretty singularly on Senua and her trauma. Saga is about Senua carrying that trauma forward while still being able to live. We get to see how Senua interacts with other people in real time, rather than just in flashbacks. One of the main themes of the game is how all monsters began as people. A major part of Senua's trauma was being ostracized and treated as a monster for how her psychosis makes her see the world. So one of the aspects that the story explores is what sets Senua apart from the creatures she encounters, and how she could have turned out to be like them. Overall, I think Senua's Saga turned out excellently. The game committed to a vision, and I believe that they brought that vision to life spectacularly. As it is, all of the elements of the game synergize wonderfully. The presentation makes the combat seem more intense, the combat makes the story moments more dramatic, and the impressive visuals, sound design, and performances all bring to life another emotionally captivating chapter in Senua's story. Astrobot is like a shot of joy being injected straight into the bloodstream. I really enjoyed this game. It does such a great job at paying homage to the legacy of PlayStation, while also firmly being its own thing. Astro's basic moveset is fun to move around with, and the level design does a really great job at enticing you to explore. I am not the sort to 100% something if I am not feeling it, and Astrobot motivated me to look for everything the game had to offer, whether it was puzzle pieces, PlayStation-themed bots, or secret levels. In addition to Astro's basic moveset being plenty of fun, the game does a good job at introducing power-ups to use throughout the level. My favorites were the sponge and the mouse power-ups. The sponge would let you inflate when you pass into water, and then you could go and expel the water to put out fires. And the mouse would make Astro smaller, and it changed the entire perspective of the level. I think something the game does excellently is the balancing act with the power-ups. It would be easy for it to feel like an ability outstays its welcome or shows up too much. What the game does instead is it takes each aspect of an ability to its logical conclusion. If the power-up shows up again, it will be used in a different way. The boss battles that come at the end of each world were all very enjoyable as well. They managed to feel like an extension of the platforming rather than a hard pivot to something completely different. The special levels were also quite enjoyable. After each boss battle, you get a level that is inspired by one of PlayStation's other classic IP. Each one did a great job at taking the spirit of the game in question and bringing it to life with Astrobot's charm and whimsy. I played this game twice this year. That is a whole lot of Final Fantasy VII. With the exception of the last couple of hours, it still is one of my favorite experiences of 2024. In general, I think Rebirth did a really good job at fine-tuning the foundation that Remake laid, especially in regards to the combat and the character writing. The biggest departure that Rebirth introduces is in the way the game is structured. Rebirth is a way more open experience than Remake was. There were a lot more side quests and extra activities. These activities are pretty hit and miss. Some side quests would be more of an investment than I was willing to put in, but others would do a great job at adding life to the world and showing us more of the fun interactions with the characters. Rebirth's story is hit and miss. The ending stumbles and certain parts overstay their welcome, but I still liked it for the most part. I think that this version did a great job of using the arcs of the characters to work as the connective tissue between the major story beats. A good example of this would be the Junon chapter. The whole tone of why the group is at the parade changed for the better in this version. I think I would say the same for the Dust Bowl segment beneath the Gold Saucer as well. My favorite thing about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the cast. They do such a great job at giving everyone time to shine. The game also manages to do it in a way that feels consistent rather than making each character hold the attention ball for their turn, and then fade into the background for the rest of the game. I also just love the dynamic the main party has with each other. Barret and Yuffie play off of each other really well, and I also enjoyed Aeris and Tifa's burgeoning friendship throughout the game. Altogether, I think that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is an enjoyable game. When I played it the second time around, there were a bunch of instances where I thought, oh man, I can't wait to get to this part while I was playing it. Rebirth has one of the most enjoyable casts I've ever encountered in a video game, and the gameplay and the story served as a wonderful vehicle for their adventure. I have never been happier to be wrong about a video game. I said last year that Hi-Fi Rush was my biggest surprise of 2023, while I would wager that Silent Hill 2 Remake actually being good is my biggest surprise of 2024. My expectations for this game were so low they may as well have been buried. But to my immense surprise and joy, Bloober Team and Konami pulled it off. The story of the game stays pretty faithful to the original. There were a couple of new scenes and a few extra endings, but altogether they feel consistent with the rest of the game. I don't think I'd be able to tell what was new and what wasn't if I had not already played the original version. The new takes on the characters were also pretty good for the most part. I think James, Angela, and Eddie all come off really well in this incarnation. The only thing that I think was a bit of a miss was Maria. I just don't think they made her out to be off enough. She's supposed to be like what would happen if James looked at Mary through a Bizarro mirror, and most of the time all she does is just seem like Mary but with pink hair. Gameplay-wise, Silent Hill 2 takes a third-person behind-the-back camera perspective. The combat is balanced pretty well. Very often I would feel like I was swimming in health supplies and ammo, only to feel like I was barely getting by after a few encounters. Your entire situation could change on a dime, and I think they did a great job at building the tension with that. The areas were all designed really well. I really felt like I managed to familiarize myself with all of the locales properly before moving on to the next thing. The sound design, creature design, and music all did an excellent job at curating a foreboding atmosphere while also drawing out my desire to explore as if it were a siren's call. It's honestly very impressive that this remake is as good as it is. Back in 2001, games didn't cost nearly as much to make, but the PS2 version of Silent Hill 2 could tackle its more difficult subject matter and be the weird art house fever dream that it was, and still make its money back. Games cost substantially more to make these days, so I was expecting a lot of the more uncomfortable subject matter and other weird aspects of the game to be scrubbed from this remake to make it more palatable to a wider audience. Thankfully, not only were those aspects still present, they were handled respectfully. So thumbs up for that one. I do so love the pace I'm on with indie horror games lately. Pro Country rules. I don't think I knew just how much I was going to like this game when I played it the first time, but here we are. I also played this game twice this year. It's certainly not as impressive as 2 Rebirth playthroughs, but it is important because that second playthrough really reinforced the experience for me. In a lot of ways, this game is similar to how I saw Sea of Stars last year, where you can see its inspirations in every corner of what it's doing, but it does such a good job at making those elements its own that it doesn't matter. The game is styled after the PS1 era of survival horror games, but it has a bunch of helpful quality of life features that make it really friendly to genre newcomers. For starters, at first blush it may look like it has the typical fixed camera pre-rendered backgrounds that you would expect a game like this to have. In reality, you're actually able to move the camera around. Your inventory isn't locked to a set number of 6 to 8 item slots, all of your ammo types get their own stack in the inventory. The combat does a good job at being tense without being frustrating. Ammo drops frequently, but it's balanced by the max capacity not being that high. So I had to go through my supplies just as quickly as I was getting them in most cases. Enemies would come at you en masse pretty often, but there was an abundance of hazards in the environments for you to take advantage of. This is all helped by the fact that the actual shooting mechanics of the game are a free aiming system, rather than a hard lock-on that you have to fight against all the time. The ball was in my court not to be bad at the game, rather than the game being frustrating because of its controls. Crow Country has such a cool aesthetic. It perfectly captures the old PS1 block visual style, while bringing the actual visuals forward enough to make it really cool to look at. The environmental backdrops are all quite detailed, and the character models all look like toy figures, and it gives the game a lot of charm. The setting itself is also incredibly atmospheric. Abandoned theme parks are inherently filled to the brim with atmosphere, and I think it's a rather underused setting for horror games in general. I really enjoyed the story of Crow Country too. It hits on a theme of greed and the uncertainty of the future in a way that I really enjoyed. It does a really good job at using memos and other documents to provide a solid breadcrumb trail for the mystery. Morrow was a great protagonist, and I really enjoyed her inner monologue throughout the game. The game took a few turns that I wasn't expecting, and overall, the gameplay and story meld together to provide a fun and foreboding ride through a truly excellent setting to create an exciting experience that I will continue to think about for a long time. There is something rather amusing about my mentality before Dragon Age's re-reveal and how I was feeling after it. Before they showed off that first trailer this year, I was saying to myself, it's okay if it's bad, you still have the other games and Baldur's Gate 3 now. After the game was revealed, it was like jumping into a cold pool. I had spent so long thinking that the next Dragon Age game was years away that I just kind of pushed down whatever excitement I would generate. The trailer they showed wasn't even very good, but all of the Dragon Age neurons in my brain activated. I very suddenly wanted to be back in Thedas as soon as possible. Once the game finally came out, I was not disappointed. Let's start with the combat and general gameplay loop. I found it to be the most engaging in the series. It takes a much more action RPG kind of approach, but I don't really mind. I feel like each element of the combat really fed into itself. I played as a rogue, so my meter was generated by hitting attacks in succession without taking damage. Things like perfect dodges or perfect parries would give me a meter boost as well. There was finally an active part for me to play while I waited for my abilities to recharge. I had to play well for this risk-reward kind of playstyle to succeed, and there were so many options in the skill grid that fed into my playstyle as well. When you combine this with the statuses you can inflict and detonate with the help of your companions, it makes for a really fun time combat-wise. The game also did a great job with the exploration, not in the vast, expansive, I want to climb that mountain in the distance kind of way, but more in the there is something around here and I want it kind of way. Anytime you run by a chest with a weapon or armor in it, there would be a little blinking icon next to the map. It had just enough presence to let you know it was there, while also being easy enough to ignore if you didn't feel like looking for it at that moment. I also really liked this game's story. Once I got over the initial weirdness of Thedas being 10 years removed from how I left it, I found there was a lot to like. The main quest did a great job at delivering bombastic high-stakes moments, and I feel like the side content was substantial enough to get me invested into the major areas I was traveling between. The side content was so good that I was as invested in the key players there as I was in the main party. And speaking of the main party, I liked everybody quite a bit. I would say that this is the group where it feels the most like everybody involved are pretty good friends with each other. Everyone also had a really solid personal quest. Each involved them being split between two different paths or identities and coming to terms with which one they wanted to embrace. My favorite companions throughout the game were Nev, Harding, and Emmerich. I also really like Rook as a protagonist. I think being a little intellectually dim, but emotionally intelligent, makes Rook an excellent foil to Solus. Speaking of Solus, I think he and the other two members of this antagonistic trio work really well for this game. Solus is perfect as the scheming enemy of my enemy kind of guy, where you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Elgernon and Gillinane have kind of a megabyte and hexadecimal thing going on. Elgernon is very much I will crush all who oppose me, and Gillinane wants to take different strips of your skin for science experiments. They both provided a lot of gravitas to the proceedings whenever they showed up. I loved Dragon Age Veilguard. Sure, it doesn't have the political intrigue that Origins or Inquisition did, but each game has its own set of advantages and drawbacks. What it does have is the most engaging combat in the series for me, and I believe that Rook being more defined allows them to be way more expressive in a manner that you don't really get with the other protagonists. The important thing to me, though, is that it delivered on an enjoyable cast of characters that I was able to get invested in, and the setting and plot worked as a great way for me to experience the story of those characters.